The slap cracked across the saloon like a bullwhip. Everyone in the room flinched. Everyone except her. The old woman behind the bar didn't even blink. She just set down the glass she'd been polishing, dabbed the blood from the corner of her mouth with a worn cloth, and looked up at the man who'd hit her with eyes the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard rolls in. Cold, quiet, counting. The man who'd done the hitting was Hank Duval. 6'2", 240 pounds of lean muscle and bad decisions. A scar split his left eyebrow clean in two, and his jaw was set like granite. He had 3 boys behind him. Garrett, the youngest, lanky and twitchy with a Colt he barely knew how to aim. Felix, stocky and slow, who made up for it by never missing a chance to be cruel. And Silas, the quiet one. The quiet ones were always the dangerous ones. Duval had been running the cattle trade out of Dusty Creek for 2 years, bleeding every small rancher, shopkeeper, and saloon owner dry. He called it a business arrangement. Everyone else called it what it was. Extortion. The old woman's name, at least as far as Dusty Creek knew, was May Calloway. 68 years old, thin as a fence rail, white hair pulled back in a tight braid that had seen better decades. Her hands shook when she poured whiskey, or they used to. Nobody paid much attention to the old woman who ran the Copper Kettle Saloon on the edge of town. She kept to herself, minded her business, smiled at the children who wandered in looking for penny candy. Nobody knew that 30 years ago, May Calloway had gone by a different name entirely, and that name had made men cross entire territories to avoid her. Before we ride any further, if you're enjoying this tale, hit that like button. And if you haven't joined Wild West Radio yet, subscribe now. Tell me what country you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now stay sharp. What's coming next will catch you off guard. Duval wiped his hand on his coat after the slap, like touching her had left something on his skin. He leaned over the bar, close enough that May could smell whiskey and saddle leather, something meaner underneath it all. "You're behind again, old lady," he said. His voice was the kind of low rumble that made dogs tuck their tails. "3rd month. I'm starting to think you don't take me serious." May picked up her cloth again, kept wiping the bar. Same slow, steady motion she'd been doing when he walked in. "I take everything serious, Mr. Duval," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost sweet, especially men who put their hands on me. The other patrons, 2 cowboys nursing beers at the far end, a traveling merchant pretending to read a newspaper, shifted in their seats. They'd watched Duval terrorize this town for 2 years, watched him break fingers, crack ribs, run a family off their ranch last spring because they couldn't make his number. Nobody fought back. Fighting back meant Duval and his boys came back worse. Nobody knew what May Calloway didn't let anyone see. What May Calloway didn't let anyone see was a mind that had spent 4 decades reading men the way most people read trail signs. Duval's weight was shifted wrong. He was telegraphing before he moved. Garrett in the back was too nervous to draw clean. Felix wouldn't act without being told. And Silas. She'd clocked Silas the moment he walked through the door. Single gun. Worn low. Maintained. That one had killed before. Old habits. They never truly died. Because May Calloway had not always been an old woman behind a bar. 30 years ago, in a territory so wild that even the army gave it a wide berth, there had been a woman known only as the instructor. She ran a training ground outside of Abilene, a hidden stretch of land where men who wanted to become legends came to learn. Not just how to draw, not just how to aim, how to think, how to read a room, how to survive when the odds said you couldn't. She trained Wyatt Earp before Dodge City made him famous. She spent 3 weeks working with Doc Holliday, teaching him to compensate for the cough that shook his hands. She tutored Billy the Kid himself, though that story ended in tragedy that wasn't her fault. The instructor trained 52 men and women who became legends of the frontier. She buried 29 of them. And one morning in 1853, after the last student rode out and the last grave was dug, May Calloway packed away her guns, sold her land, and disappeared into the quiet like smoke dissolving in wind. She made a promise. To herself. To the memory of her husband, Thomas, who died of a fever the same year she'd started teaching. "No more blood," she told his grave. "Not after this. I'm done." Now Hank Duval was making her break that promise. Duval slapped his palm flat on the bar. The sound made Garrett jump. Here's how this works, May. You pay what you owe by tomorrow noon. Or we come back, and this little saloon of yours becomes kindling, and then we start on what's behind it. The boarding house, the livery, all of it, until this town gets the message. He pushed off the bar, turned to leave. His boys followed. Silas was already at the door when May spoke. Mr. Duval. Something in her tone made him stop. Not the words. The tone. The way it dropped half an octave lower than it had been a second before, like a key turning in a lock. Duval turned back slowly. May stood up straight behind the bar. The shaking in her hands was gone. Completely gone. Her spine had straightened, and the way she held herself had shifted, subtle, almost invisible, but every man in that room felt it. The air changed. I'm going to give you one chance, she said. One. Walk out of here. Take your boys. Leave Dusty Creek. Tonight. Don't come back. Don't send word. Don't think about it. Just go. Duval stared at her. Then he laughed. It was a hard laugh. Genuine, the kind you give when something is genuinely funny to you and nothing in the world can scare you. Or what? He asked. May smiled. It wasn't kind. It wasn't angry. It was the smile of a woman who had already seen how this story ended and had made peace with every word of it. Where you find out why they named me the instructor. The saloon went so silent you could hear the dust settle. Duval's smile flickered. Not much. Just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. The kind of thing you only noticed if you were watching for it. And May was always watching. The instructor, he repeated, like he was tasting the words. That's a ghost story. Ghosts don't pour whiskey, May said. She moved to the far end of the bar. Slow. Deliberate. Every eye in the room tracking her. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a wooden case. Long, narrow, the wood dark with age and oil. The brass clasps were green with tarnish, but when she lifted the lid, the leather inside was perfect. Maintained. Waiting. 2 guns lay in the case, nestled in custom-cut foam. Not fancy showpieces. Working weapons. A Colt single-action army on the left, ivory gripped, the metal worn smooth by years of use. On the right, a shorter barrel model, lighter, designed for speed. Along the barrels, tiny marks had been scratched into the metal. 52 of them. One for every legend she'd made. May lifted the larger Colt from the case. She didn't put it on. Didn't holster it. She just held it, turning it once in the lamplight, the way a carpenter holds a hammer he hasn't touched in years. Relearning the weight. Relearning the balance. Duval's hand drifted toward his own gun. Don't, May said, without looking at him. I haven't fired this gun in 30 years. But I haven't forgotten a single thing I ever learned about how to use one. And I taught Wyatt Earp everything he knows, Mr. Duval. Every single thing. She set the gun on the bar between them, calm as setting down a coffee cup. Walk away. Last chance I'll ever give. Duval looked at his boys. Felix had gone pale. Garrett's hand was trembling near his holster. Even Silas, quiet, cold, dangerous Silas, had taken half a step back. But pride was the oldest killer in the West. Older than gold fever. Older than the land itself. I don't run from old women, Duval said. They faced each other in the street. May had strapped on the gun belt outside. The leather settled against her hip like it had never left. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Not even a little. She stood in the middle of Dusty Creek's main road, the afternoon sun warm on her face, and for the first time in 30 years, she felt like herself again. A crowd had gathered. Word traveled like wildfire in small towns. People watched from doorways, from behind barrels, from upper windows. Some had seen Duval terrorize their neighbors for 2 years and done nothing because they couldn't. Now they watched an old woman prepare to do what none of them had dared. Duval stood 40 feet away, his Colt Dragoon on his right hip. He was fast. May knew that already. She'd watched him draw twice in the saloon weeks ago, casually, the way men like him showed off. He cleared leather in about a quarter second. Respectable. Would have been dangerous against most men. But most men hadn't spent 20 years studying the exact mechanics of drawing a gun faster than any living human being. May had. You sure about this? Duval called out. His voice carried across the silent street, like a gunshot waiting to happen. Because once this starts, there's no walking it back. Not for you. Not for me. May's hand hung loose at her side. Not near the gun. Not yet. She was reading him, reading his shoulders, the weight on his back foot, the way his fingers curled and uncurled at his side. The tiny tells that men never learn to hide because they never met someone who knew what to look for. She'd taught Wyatt Earp to read those same tells. She'd taught Doc Holliday. She'd spent 2 weeks with Billy the Kid breaking down every flicker of muscle movement the human body made before a draw. And she'd always been faster than every single one of them. Duval moved. His hand dropped. Fingers wrapped the grip. The Colt cleared leather in a blur, fast, clean, the draw of a man who'd practiced it 1,000 times. But May had already seen it coming. The shift in his right shoulder. The breath held. The weight dropping a fraction of an inch onto his back foot. She'd felt it, the way she always felt it, like a clock ticking 1 second before it chimed. Her draw was nothing like his. There was no flash, no drama. The gun simply appeared in her hand. Smooth, economical, every unnecessary movement stripped away decades ago until all that remained was the motion itself. Pure and fast and final. Bang! The shot cracked across the street like thunder breaking open a clear sky. Duval's gun went off a heartbeat later, but only because the bullet had already hit. May's round caught him dead center in the chest, punching through with a force that lifted him off his heels. He staggered back. His eyes went wide. Not with pain, not yet, but with something worse. Surprise. The sudden, terrible understanding that he had miscalculated badly. His shot went high, shattered a window somewhere behind May. She didn't flinch. Duval dropped to his knees, looked down at the hole in his shirt, at the red spreading outward like a stain on a map. Then he pitched forward into the dust and didn't move again. The street was silent for exactly 3 heartbeats. Then Garrett drew. The youngest boy was scared, and scared men did stupid things. May had seen it 100 times in her years of teaching. Fear made men act before they thought. Made them draw when they should have run. Bang! She didn't kill him. She didn't need to. The round caught the Colt in his hand, ripping it clean out and sending pieces of the grip spinning into the dirt. Garrett screamed and stumbled backward, clutching his hand, the fingers bloody but not broken. May had aimed for the gun, not the man. On purpose. Felix didn't even try. He looked at Duval in the dirt, looked at his brother on his knees, howling, looked at the old woman in the street with the smoking Colt in her hand and eyes like winter. He dropped his gun and put his hands up, which left Silas. The quiet one had moved during the chaos. Clever. He'd stepped sideways, using Felix as a screen, getting an angle on May that she couldn't have covered easily. His single gun was drawn and aimed, not at her chest, but at her head. A precision shot. The kind of shot that said, I know what I'm doing. May and Silas locked eyes across the street. 2 professionals, both with guns up, both knowing that the next second would decide everything. Silas was good. May could see it in his stance, in the way he breathed, in the controlled steadiness of his aim. He'd killed before, probably more than once. He was fast and cold and patient, everything a dangerous man needed to be. But May Calloway had spent 20 years teaching men exactly like Silas how to shoot. She knew every version of him, every possible move. Bang! May's shot took the gun out of Silas's hand at the wrist. Not a disabling wound, a precise surgical strike that sent the weapon spinning into the dust and left his arm useless for the fight. He gasped, grabbed his wrist, and stared at her. May lowered her Colt. Slowly, deliberately. She didn't holster it. Just let it hang at her side. Pick up your brother, she said. Get him to the doctor. Then all 3 of you ride out of Dusty Creek. Tonight. And don't stop riding until you can't hear this town anymore. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. No argument. No pride left to argue with. He'd just watched a 68-year-old woman shoot the guns out of 3 men's hands without killing a single one of them. The message was clear. They left. Garrett stumbling, Felix carrying him, Silas holding his wrist, and walking like a man who just learned something he couldn't unlearn. May stood alone in the street for a long time after they were gone. The crowd that had watched the whole thing didn't rush forward. Not at first. They stood in doorways and at the edges of the road, staring at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Because they were. She'd never been just old May from the copper kettle. She'd been something else entirely, something sleeping beneath the surface of an ordinary life, something that had just woken up. Doc Perkins pushed through the crowd first. A careful man, gray-bearded, who'd patched up half the county. He looked at Duval's body, then at May, then at the gun still hanging loosely in her hand. "May," he said gently, "you okay?" She holstered the Colt carefully. Her hands had started to shake again, not from fear, from the weight of what she'd done, from 30 years of promises crumbling in 90 seconds. "I need to sit down," she said quietly. Doc Perkins walked her back to the copper kettle, one arm under hers, steady and without fuss. Inside, she sat at the bar, her bar, and poured herself a whiskey. The good stuff. The bottle she kept for emergencies or for terrible days that felt like both at once. The whiskey burned, didn't wash anything away, didn't make the image of Duval's surprised eyes any quieter, didn't erase the sound of the gun and Garrett's hand breaking apart. She poured another, sat in the silence of her saloon, replayed it all in her mind, the way she'd taught her students to do. The draw was clean. The aim was true. The decisions were sound. By every standard she'd ever set, she'd performed perfectly. So why did she feel like she'd lost something she could never get back? That evening, after the saloon emptied, May walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town. Thomas's grave was there, a simple headstone, weathered by 10 years of Kansas wind. She sat on the ground beside it, the night air cold on her face, and talked to him the way she always did when the world got too heavy to carry alone. "I broke my promise today, Thomas," she said. Said I was done. Said never again. But a bad man came to our town, and nobody else could stop him. She looked at the stars. So I did what I swore I wouldn't. The night was quiet. Crickets whined through cottonwood leaves. Nothing answered her. Nothing ever did. "I don't regret it," she whispered. "But I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the world still needs people like me." 3 days later, a young woman rode into Dusty Creek. Her name was Ruby Graves. She was 26, lean and sharp-eyed, with a marshal's badge pinned to her coat that looked newer than the rest of her clothes. She'd been sent by the territorial marshal's office to take a statement about what had happened with Duval. Ruby sat across from May in the copper kettle, notebook open, pencil ready, and listened without interrupting. When May finished, the younger woman set the pencil down and studied her for a long moment. "Before I took this job," Ruby said carefully, "I trained under a woman named Adelaide Crane. Adelaide learned from a man named Cooper, who spent 3 years with a trainer outside Abilene back in the 60s. She paused. A woman trainer. The only one anyone's ever heard of. May said nothing, just held her coffee cup with both hands. "The marshal's office is expanding," Ruby continued. "We need teachers more than we need gunfighters. People who can train deputies and sheriffs. Not to be legends, but to be good. To know when to draw and when not to. To know the difference between protecting people and hurting them." She looked at May directly. "We need someone like you." May was quiet for a long time. She thought about Thomas, about the 52 students she'd made into something, about the 29 she'd buried, about Duval lying in the street that afternoon, about the promise she'd made and broken. "I'm 68 years old," she said finally. Ruby smiled. "You shot the guns out of 3 men's hands yesterday, without killing any of them. You're not too old for anything, Miss Calloway." May looked out the window at Dusty Creek, the town she'd been hiding in for a decade, pretending to be nobody. The town that had just watched her be somebody. "I'll do it," she said, "but on my terms. I teach here. I don't travel. I don't carry a badge. I just teach." The first student arrived a week later. A deputy named Samuel Ford from a town 30 miles south. Young, eager, terrible with a gun, but willing to learn, and in May's experience, willingness was worth more than talent every single time. She spent 2 weeks with him, not just teaching him to shoot, teaching him to see, to read a room, to read a man, to understand that the fastest draw in the world meant nothing if you didn't first understand whether you needed to draw at all. Samuel Ford would never be a legend. He'd never get his name in a dime novel. But when he rode back to his town, he was something better than a gunfighter. He was a protector. Word spread the way it always did in the Old West. Fast, loud, unstoppable. The territorial marshals sent more students. Deputies. Sheriffs. Young women looking to make their way in a frontier that didn't hand anything to anyone easy. May trained them all. Patient. Precise. Relentless. Not just teaching the mechanics, but morality. Not just how to fight, but why. Over the next 7 years, May Calloway trained 71 lawmen and lawwomen across the territory. Not one became a famous gunfighter. Not one got their name carved in a legend. But together, they saved more than 300 lives. They stopped 40 gangs, kept the peace in towns that had given up on peace ever coming, built something quieter than glory, but harder to destroy. May watched every one of them ride out, and for the first time in 30 years, she didn't feel the weight of violence. She felt the opposite. She felt like she'd finally found a way to use everything she'd learned to build something instead of end something. 5 years after teaching her last student, May Calloway sat on the porch of the Copper Kettle one evening in late spring. The sun was going down over Dusty Creek, warm gold light painting everything it touched. The town had changed. New families, new businesses, a school now, with children running in the yard after lessons. Ruby Graves rode in that evening with news. A letter from the territorial marshal, thanking May for her service. A modest pension, and a single line at the bottom, written by hand. You didn't just teach them to shoot. You taught them to choose. That's the rarest lesson anyone can give. May read it twice, folded it carefully, put it in her pocket, next to a worn photograph of Thomas, young, smiling, standing beside her on the day they married. You did good work, Ruby said. May looked out at the town she'd helped save. The town that had saved her. So did they, she said. May Calloway lived another 4 years after that evening. Quiet years. Peaceful years. She tended bar 3 days a week and taught on the others. She sat on her porch and watched sunsets. She visited Thomas's grave on Sundays and told him, each time, that she was okay, that the world was a little better than it had been. When she died, it was in her sleep in the small room above the Copper Kettle on a night so still you could hear the stars. They buried her next to Thomas. The whole town came. Lawmen she'd trained rode in from across 3 territories to pay respects. Ruby Graves gave the eulogy. May Calloway spent the first part of her life teaching people how to fight, Ruby said, standing beside the grave with her hat in her hands. It haunted her, so she walked away, tried to disappear. But when evil came to our town, she stood up, not for glory, not for fame, because it was right. And then she did something even harder. She turned everything she knew about violence into something that built the world instead of burning it. The lawmen present fired 3 shots into the sky, the traditional salute. The thunder of their guns rolled across the Kansas plains and echoed for miles. They marked her grave with a simple stone. May Calloway, 1815 to 1883. The instructor. She taught legends how to shoot straight. Then she taught lawmen something better. She taught them justice. The Copper Kettle stayed open under new ownership. They never changed the name. Behind the bar, in a glass case, hang May's 2 Colts with their 52 marks. A small plaque reads, "The Guns of May Calloway." She made legends. Then she made protectors. Both mattered. And in towns across the frontier, in saloons and sheriff's offices, and around evening campfires, people tell the story of the old bartender who was slapped by a bully and shot the guns out of 3 men's hands without killing a single one. The woman who proved that the deadliest person in any room isn't always the loudest, the biggest, or the youngest. Sometimes it's the quiet one behind the bar. The one who's been waiting 30 years for someone to give her a reason to remember who she really is. If this story of courage, legacy, and quiet strength touched your heart, don't let it end here. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another tale from the frontier. We bring you stories of the Old West every week. Real courage, the kind that comes from using strength to protect instead of destroy. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought. Would you have walked away when May gave you the chance? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is, the most dangerous person you'll ever meet isn't the one carrying the biggest gun. It's the one who already knows they don't need one. Until next time, ride safe, friends.